Before I get to the hospital room confrontation, where Richard learns the difference between a title and authority, I have to ask, have you ever seen a family business ruined by one entitled relative? Drop a truth in the comments, and let's keep going. I had walked into the offices of Heritage Asphalt and Paving 10 years ago, a teenager with a high school diploma and a desperate need for a steady paycheck. Back then, the company was led by Elias Heritage, the kind of man who knew the name of every grader and steamroller operator on the payroll. His wife, Catherine, would bring home-baked cookies to the office every Friday, and their daughter, Megan, was a force of nature who could operate a paving machine just as easily as she could balance a profit and loss statement. It was a meritocracy in its purest form. Elias didn't care about bloodlines. He cared about sweat and loyalty. When I showed an aptitude for the complex logistics of paving contracts, he didn't just give me a desk. He gave me an education. He mentored me in the delicate art of supplier relations, teaching me that a paving company is only as strong as its reputation for paying on time. Megan's husband was the site manager, a man respected by the on-site crews for never asking them to do a job he wouldn't do himself. We were a well-oiled machine, navigating the boom and bust of the construction industry with grace. Elias and Catherine were the parents I never had, and the company felt less like a workplace and more like a fortress. But the fortress began to crumble 6 months ago. During a routine physical, Elias was diagnosed with aggressive stage 3 cancer. The news hit us like a sledgehammer. Elias immediately made plans to step down, intending to name his son-in-law as the new president. We all breathed a sigh of relief, knowing the legacy was safe. We didn't know that the black sheep of the family had been watching from the shadows, waiting for the patriarch to weaken. Richard Heritage hadn't been seen or heard from in nearly 30 years. According to the veterans in the shop, he had been disowned as a teenager after a string of run-ins with the law and a habit of stealing from the company's petty cash. He was a silver-tongued grifter who had spent his adult life jumping from one multi-level marketing scheme to another, leaving a trail of bankrupt investors in his wake. But when news of Elias's illness leaked, Richard appeared at the hospital with tears in his eyes and a script that would have won an Oscar. "I've changed, Dad," he'd sobbed at Elias's bedside. "I've realized that family is all that matters. Please, let me make things right before it's too late." Elias, softened by age and the looming shadow of mortality, wanted to believe. He wanted his family whole before the end. Despite Megan's warnings and the silent disapproval of the senior staff, Elias allowed Richard and his family, a wife who looked like she'd stepped out of a high-end fashion magazine, and a college-age daughter who looked bored by the very existence of paving, to move into the family annex. Richard was given a job in the office, but his work was a farce. He would show up at 11 a.m., smelling of expensive cologne and lunch-hour martinis, and spend his time demeaning the laborers. "Physical labor is for people with low IQs," I overheard him telling a veteran foreman who had been with the company for 20 years. "You're all just worker ants. My father was too soft on you, but I'm a modern executive. I look at the big picture." The big picture, it seemed, was Richard's own bank account. As Elias's condition worsened and he was hospitalized for a long-term treatment cycle, Richard saw his opening. He pressured Catherine, playing on her maternal guilt, until she convinced a weakened Elias to appoint Richard as the president. "He's the eldest son, Megan," Catherine had pleaded during a heated board meeting. "He deserves a chance to lead the family legacy. We have to believe he's changed." It was a decision born of love, but it was a death sentence for the company's morale. The harmonious atmosphere evaporated overnight, replaced by a toxic tension that made every morning feel like a march into a war zone. Megan and her husband were sidelined, forced to work in the field just to keep the contracts from falling apart, leaving me alone in the office with a president who couldn't tell the difference between asphalt and gravel. With Richard at the helm, the administrative workload tripled. Catherine and Megan used to handle the heavy lifting of billing and payroll alongside me, but Richard had banished them from the office. He didn't want them seeing the books, and he certainly didn't want them questioning his executive expenses. I found myself working until midnight, fueled by caffeine and a sense of loyalty to Elias. I was the only one left who knew the passwords, the filing systems, and the payment cycles. Meanwhile, Richard treated the company credit card like a winning lottery ticket. I watched in horror as the ledger began to fill with charges from high-end hostess bars, horse racing bets, and consultancy fees paid to his gambling buddies. "Richard, these dining expenses from the Diamond Lounge aren't justifiable," I told him one afternoon, holding a stack of receipts that totaled more than a foreman's monthly salary. He didn't even look up from his racing form. "It's called client development, Sarah. You wouldn't understand the nuances of high-level networking. Just code it as marketing and move on." "Our clients are municipal planners and road contractors," I countered. "They don't go to the Diamond Lounge. They go to the job site." "Are you questioning me?" He finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "I'm the president of Heritage Asphalt. If I say a 3-course steak dinner with 4 bottles of Cristal is a business expense, then it's a business expense. Your job is to make the numbers work, not to play moral police." I could see the trajectory we were on. The company's cash reserves, built up over decades of Elias's frugal management, were being bled dry to fund Richard's delusions of grandeur. He saw the company not as a business to be grown, but as a carcass to be picked clean. He underestimated my quietness for weakness, never realizing that as the person holding the pen, I was the only one seeing the true extent of the rot he was creating. I stayed because I hoped Elias would recover and fix this, but Richard was counting on the fact that I had nowhere else to go. The breaking point didn't come from a gambling debt or a bar tab. It came from a box of lace and elastic. Richard walked into the office one morning and tossed a receipt onto my desk with a flourish. "Expense this. It's for a potential new revenue stream I'm exploring." I picked up the receipt. It was from a boutique specializing in luxury compression shapewear, essentially high-end corrective underwear. The total was $4,000. "Richard, this is a personal purchase for your wife," I said, unable to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "It has absolutely nothing to do with paving roads." "She's the president's wife, Sarah," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "She represents the brand. If she doesn't look the part of a high society executive spouse, the company's image suffers. It's an investment in our corporate identity." "No, it's a $4,000 corset," I snapped back. "And the IRS would agree with me. I cannot and will not categorize this as a business expense." Richard's face turned a shade of purple I'd never seen before. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his executive composure. "Fine. If you're going to be a bean counter about it, we'll pivot. We're going to start a subsidiary, Heritage Vitality. We'll sell this shapewear to our contractors' wives. We'll categorize the $4,000 as initial inventory. See? Problem solved." I stared at him, wondering if he'd finally had a psychotic break. "We are an asphalt company, Richard. We deal in tar and heavy machinery. We cannot start selling girdles to the Department of Transportation. It would destroy our credibility instantly." "It's easy money," he chuckled, his eyes gleaming with the predatory light of a lifelong scammer. "We tell our suppliers that if they want to keep their contracts, they need to buy a starter kit for their spouses. $2,000 for a single piece, $4,000 for the full set. It's a win-win." "That's not a business venture," I whispered. "That's extortion, and it's illegal." "What's illegal is you telling me how to run my company," Richard growled, leaning in close. "You've become a liability, Sarah. You're small-minded and obstructive. You better start thinking about your future, because if you aren't on board with the new vision, you're going to find yourself on the street." I realized then that the man was beyond reasoning. He was a parasite who had finally found a host large enough to satisfy his greed, and he was willing to burn the entire legacy to the ground for a commission on a piece of shapewear. I left the office that day and made my first call to Megan. The right moment had arrived. The 20th arrived with a heavy fog and an even heavier sense of dread. As I sat down to process the monthly transfers to our stone and fuel suppliers, Richard burst into the office with his daughter in tow. She was wearing an outfit that cost more than my car and was staring at her phone with utter indifference. "Sarah, today is your last day," Richard announced, his voice booming with a performative authority. "My daughter Tiffany is taking over the accounts. She's a college graduate, so she can handle a few spreadsheets without the moral commentary. Pack your things and leave." I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Richard, you can't fire me without notice, and you certainly can't do it today. The suppliers are expecting their payments by noon. If the accounts aren't settled, the quarries will put us on a cash-only basis, or worse, they'll stop the deliveries to the interstate project." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Let them wait. If they complain, tell them we're reviewing the contracts, and they should give us this month's load for free as a gesture of goodwill. If they don't like it, tell them we'll switch to their competitors. That's how real business works, Sarah. It's called leverage. You want me to threaten the people who have kept this company running for 30 years? I was aghast. "That's not leverage, that's suicide." "I told you to leave," Richard sneered, stepping toward me. "Tiffany doesn't need your help. She's family. She won't question where the money goes. Now get out before I call the police for trespassing." I looked at Tiffany, who hadn't even looked up from her screen. I looked at the ledger, where the unpaid bills of honest men were sitting. And then I looked at Richard. "Just remember," I said, my voice quiet but sharp. "I warned you. This won't end the way you think it will." I grabbed my bag and walked out. I didn't go home. I went to the beach to clear the tar from my soul, but first I sent one final email to the one person Richard had forgotten to account for, the actual owner. By 6 p.m., my phone was a buzzing hive of panicked messages. Richard's voice on the voicemail progressed from arrogant to terrified in the span of 3 hours. "Sarah, what did you do? The bank is saying my signature is invalid. The fuel contractor just pulled his trucks off the site. Explain yourself." I walked into Elias's hospital room an hour later. Catherine and Megan were already there, sitting by Elias's bed. Richard was pacing in the corner, his face a pale, sweating mess. "There she is!" Richard shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's sabotaged the accounts. Dad, you have to fire her for real this time. She's blocked the payments." Elias looked up from his pillows. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharper than I'd seen them in months. "She didn't block anything, Richard. I did." "What are you talking about?" Richard stammered. "I'm the president. I have the authority." I stepped forward, pulling a document from my bag. "Richard, this is where your lack of a real education failed you. You spent 3 months playing president because you thought it was a crown. In a corporation, president is a title given to an employee. It's an internal rank." Richard blinked, uncomprehending. "But the representative director," I continued, "is the only person with the legal authority to bind the company to external contracts, authorize bank transfers, and sign for the corporation in the eyes of the law. To change the representative director, you need a formal board meeting, a recorded vote, and a filing with the state. None of that happened." Richard turned to his father. "But you said I was in charge." "I said you were the president," Elias said, his voice raspy but firm. "It was a test. Sarah and Megan proposed the idea months ago. We wanted to see if you had truly changed, or if you were still the same man who stole from his own mother 30 years ago. We kept the representative director title in my name, with Megan as the secondary signatory. You were just a figurehead, Richard. You were a president with the legal power of a summer intern." Richard's face drained of color. But I fired her. I told the suppliers to jump off a bridge. And because you have no legal standing as a representative director, I added, your termination of my contract is null and void. And your threats to the suppliers? I've already called them all. They know you were an unauthorized actor. Megan has already processed the payments from her terminal. You think you're so smart, Richard hissed, trying to regain some shred of his shattered ego. So what? You're still just a clerk. My father will eventually have to sign over the company to me. I'm the blood heir. That's the other thing you didn't bother to check in the corporate bylaws, Richard, I said. Heritage Asphalt isn't 100% family-owned. 7 years ago, when the company hit a rough patch, Elias didn't take a bank loan. He offered stock to the employees he trusted the most to raise capital. I looked at Elias, who gave me a slight, tired nod. I don't just work there, Richard. I own 10% of the voting shares. Between my 10% and Megan's 41%, we hold the majority. We don't need your father's signature to remove you. We've already held an emergency shareholder meeting via Zoom while I was at the beach. Richard looked like he'd been struck by lightning. You have shares? Elias gave them to me as a loyalty grant 5 years ago, I said. And as a shareholder, I am officially proposing your immediate removal for gross mismanagement, attempted extortion, and the unauthorized use of company funds for luxury compression shapewear. The board, which consists of me and Megan, has already voted. You're not just fired, Richard. You're being sued for every cent of company money you spent at the Diamond Lounge. Catherine stood up and walked over to her son. The maternal love that had blinded her for months was gone, replaced by a cold, hard disappointment. I wanted to believe in you, Richard. I really did. But you were just waiting for your father to die so you could sell his life's work for lace and gambling tickets. Get out of this room, and don't ever call us family again. Richard tried to threaten us with lawsuits, but he didn't even have the money for a retainer. He had spent his last commission on his daughter's designer wardrobe. But we weren't just removing Richard, we were protecting the legacy. Elias knew that Heritage Asphalt and Paving was tainted by Richard's brief, disastrous reign. The suppliers were wary, and the shapewear scandal had become a joke in the industry. We're shutting it down, Sarah, Elias told me that night. I'm dissolving the corporation. But Megan has already filed the paperwork for a new entity, Phoenix Paving and Logistics. The strategy was brilliant. By dissolving the old company, we wiped the slate clean. Megan and her husband took the equipment and the contracts, and most importantly, they took the people. Every single one of the 20 employees, from the veteran foreman to the junior clerical staff, resigned from Heritage Asphalt the next morning and signed on with Phoenix. Richard walked into an empty office the following Monday. No phones were ringing, no trucks were idling in the yard. The president was sitting in a hollowed-out building, surrounded by boxes of unsold corrective underwear. He had inherited the title he wanted so badly, only to find that a title is worthless when there's no one left to lead. Richard and his wife didn't go quietly, but they did go quickly. In a desperate attempt to recoup their investment, they tried to push the shapewear through an actual pyramid scheme. They were arrested 6 months later for aggressive sales tactics and fraudulent health claims. When the police searched the annex of the Heritage home, they found 300 sets of corrective underwear, the only legacy Richard had left. Elias's health took a surprising turn for the better once the stress of Richard was gone. He's in remission now, acting as a senior consultant for Phoenix Paving, mostly spending his days at the job sites telling stories to the new recruits. As for me, I'm no longer just a clerical worker. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Phoenix. I still handle the 20th of the month payments, but now I do it from an office with my name on the door and a seat on the board that no one can take away. I learned that sometimes you have to let a fire burn itself out so you can build something stronger on the ashes. Richard thought he was the protagonist of his own prodigal son story. He didn't realize he was just the cautionary tale. True leadership isn't a title you inherit. It's the trust you build every day with the people who do the work. Richard wanted a crown, but he forgot to build a kingdom. If you believe in loyalty over bloodlines, hit that like button and subscribe. See you in the next one.